Hello everyone and welcome back to another Prehistoric Planet video where today we're going to be going through every species that we currently have confirmed for Prehistoric Planet Ice Age, and also a couple of species that I think would be really fun additions to the series. So a lot of animals that haven't been fully confirmed but also existed with a lot of the species that we know are in the series. So without further ado, let's get started. So episode 1 we have the big freeze, so I'm going to be going in episode order. And we would be exploring many of the animals that would be living in the coniferous forests and frigid tundras, such as the Coelodonta or woolly rhinoceros, which we see living in quite a large group. Now, rhinos can be social, with the white rhinoceros of Africa in particular being found in groups that can consist up to 12 individuals, which looks to be the approach being taken here. And it is possible that Coelodonta, being surrounded by many predators and not being the largest rhino around, may have lived in small herds as depicted here. We also have a shot of a mother interacting with her little calf, with the little horns being nubs at its age, and you can see a lot of inspiration from the white rhinoceros here with the square lip being portrayed on this Coelodonta. You can't have an Ice Age documentary without Mammuthus primigenius, or the woolly mammoth, being the best known and best understood of the wildlife found at this time. And we will be seeing mammoths across the series, with it sort of playing a similar role to the Tyrannosaurus rex in the previous seasons of Prehistoric Planet, being an animal that is featured a few times throughout the course of the series, and we see them in episodes 4 and 5 as well, enduring drought and defending themselves against predators. So you can see we have a few different looks at it here. So we have a couple in the snow with a little baby, and out here in the desert. And I'd also like to take the time here to mention that it has been revealed that the coat on the mammoth is composed in excess of 4 million individual hairs on the model displayed in the show, which is just amazing and brings this animal to life in probably the best form it has ever taken. Megaloceros also appears in the series, another Ice Age classic well known for the stag's huge antlers, and it's great to see here as we do actually have a great idea of the coloration of Megaloceros thanks to cave paintings by humans that depicted it with a brown body and a pale white neck and head. Megalonyx is one of at least 3 ground sloths that will be featured in the series, placed in a much snowier environment than the other 2 species, and it can be seen here the mother carrying its youngest baby on its back, much like how tree sloths and their close relatives the anteaters also do, with the baby trying to blend in with the mother's coloration. Now, Megalonyx is also considered the species that Sid the Sloth from the Ice Age films was based off of, and so you have a somewhat Ice Age classic also being featured in this series. We see a Smilodon here. Now this is likely Smilodon populator, as it is roaming through a Valdivian forest populated by Araucaria trees in what is most likely Conguillo National Park in Chile and Patagonia in South America, which is actually the same location used in Walking with Dinosaurs' final episode, Death of a Dynasty. An interesting note that the description of this image gave was that this individual is portrayed with 2 pairs of sabers. So this came from a recent hypothesis based on how the tooth socket in immature Smilodon skulls had space for 2 teeth, with some specimens showing a fully erupted baby tooth and an adult saber just erupting. The adult saber would grow through a groove in the juvenile saber to support it until it became strong enough to withstand damage. The baby tooth would then eventually drop out and the adult tooth would take its place. And so yeah, it's a really great recent hypothesis to be depicted here, as well as another hypothesis that we'll see later with Homotherium. But yeah, great that we're getting Smilodon here and a beautiful environment to depict it in. And this scenario is really much like what I'd expect from a documentary focused on big cats, where you see them roaming around their territory, scent marking, sniffing, just interacting with different parts of their environment and establishing their territory and making sure it's all in check and that they haven't got any intruders. As this episode largely focuses on the more frigid landscapes of the Ice Age, then I'd certainly love to see the largely herbivorous cave bear appear in the series, as it is another classic Ice Age species, and I think it would be great for the bear diversity in the series, as they are a fairly well-known animal being found in caves in places like Transylvania, where you've got a location called the Cave with Bones, which has many cave bear specimens that have been found trapped at the end of the caves. Another animal that is often associated with the Ice Age, and even the cave bear, is the cave lion, which has been found alongside cave bear remains in Transylvania, where both animals couldn't escape a muddy tomb at the end of various cave systems. But this was a prominent predator in Eurasia during this time, and it would make sense to include it here, as we also have a pretty good understanding of this species, such as a cub that was found in recent years that could really show the coloration of cave lions very well. Episode 2 is New Lands, where we're going to be visiting places that have become newly accessible as the Ice Age has continued, with various islands and land masses being available for colonization by different animals. One of the animals being featured is the Floresian species of Stegodon, an elephant that was found across South Asia, with one species evolving in isolation on the island of Flores in eastern Indonesia. This species was subject to insular dwarfism, which makes an animal that was large on the mainland become much smaller, and in this case it has become a lot smaller than its mainland cousins on Sundaland, an area of land that connected Malaysia and Indochina to islands like Borneo, Sumatra and Java. I do particularly love the detail you can see on this still of the calf, all the individual hairs and sunlight illuminating the veins in its ears. That is just incredible attention to detail, even just all the individual wrinkles in the skin. Real credit to the artists that worked on this animal. Leptoptilus robustus also appears here, a large species of stork in the same genus as the marabou stork of Africa and the lesser and greater adjutants of Southeast Asia. The main difference to its contemporaries is its size, being close to 6 feet in height, making it more than a match for many of the animals also present on Flores during the Pleistocene, and it is certainly a possible threat to the young Stegodon. And yeah, it certainly looks formidable. You can see a similar level of detail in the feathers around the head. And these storks are largely bald, but they do have a couple of feathers still left on their heads. It also looks like it will cover aspects about the Great American Interchange as well in this episode, such as the disappearance of terror birds and how they were very much a remnant during the late Pleistocene. We won't be getting the giants like Titanus or Forest Rachis, as both would have long disappeared by the late Pleistocene, with what was one of the last Forest Rachis being Celopterus, about the same size as modern cousin the Seriemas of South America. With the help of some of you guys in the comments of the last Prehistoric Planet video, we can determine that this is indeed Celopterus, as you need to look no further than Gabriele Gueto's art, of which he is actually one of the artists that has worked on the series. And there are some key similarities in the two depictions, mainly the coloration and pattern, which is almost identical. But I think it's just great that we're getting at least one terror bird in this series, and yeah, it's certainly almost going to be a little sad given this is the last of the terror birds practically. Macrokenia, or at least what we believe to be Macrokenia, will also be featured in this episode, sporting a more up-to-date depiction, with it sporting a fleshy inflatable sac on its snout rather than a prominent trunk as seen in previous interpretations like that of Walking with Beasts. Though some have suggested this could also be its sister species Xenorhinotherium, which all things considered looks very similar. And so yeah, let me know which one do you think it is. Is it Macrokenia or is it Xenorhinotherium? Arctotherium angustidens, aka the giant short-faced bear, also appears here with the carcass of a Macrokenia, and it's really great to see this species here, as it was definitely a species I hoped for, with it being the largest carnivorous mammal ever known to have lived. Much bigger than a polar bear, much bigger than a cave bear, and any other species of Arctotherium that we know of. And so it's a really formidable species, and it's kind of scary to know that this animal only existed a couple thousand years ago. But yeah, it's really nice to see this animal being depicted in the series, and I'm really excited for its appearance. Glyptotherium is a species we've known about in this show for a while, and it's simply amazing. The level of detail in not just the fur, but also the textures on its shell are immaculate, and the cute little baby just trotting along is really nice. It's great to get some diversity for animals like armadillos in this series, as we will see in other species later, as these animals are fairly well understood, but were also very diverse at this time. And so yeah, Glyptotherium is a great species to see here. Now I remember, like, the last depiction I remember of a Glyptotherium for me hearing about was in Ice Age Giants, when it was depicted with a trunk, but that is clearly not part of this animal, so I suppose that hypothesis has been discounted now. But because that was about 2013, I think, that show released. So it has been a while, but yeah, it's really great to see this animal brought to life here. This is probably one of my favorite stills of the entire series. Just showing a Smilodon, what looks to be a Smilodon fatalis, that just looks like a photo. It is immaculate. The details in the fur is just amazing. Like, you can see all the waves, even got the whiskers coming from both where you expect whiskers to come on a cat, but also above the eyes. Just an incredible detail. But we can deduce that this is likely fatalis, as the environment seems to be fairly reminiscent of the same surroundings of the Glyptotherium, which is a semi-arid to arid southwestern United States style. So yeah, we'll find out when the show releases whether this is fatalis or it is populator. But yeah, easily one of my favourite models of the series. Eremotherium is the identity of this giant ground sloth, as identified by Apple TV over on the press release, and a few members of the community were able to identify it by it having 2 prominent toes instead of 3, so the latter of which would have indicated a species like Megatherium. But Eremotherium is considered the largest of the ground sloths, and here they are depicting it with a more recent hypothesis of the largest ground sloths being completely hairless, or at least partially hairless, as an animal of its great size likely may have overheated in its tropical environment if given a thick fur coat, and so having skin more akin to modern rhinos and elephants would have really benefited it in this very warm area. Standing in for a prehistoric squirrel, I imagine, or it could even be the variegated squirrel itself, is here in South America in what might be featured in the same scene as the Eremotherium. The small stop-the-human species Homo floresiensis was present on the island of Flores at the same time as Stegodon and Leptoptilus, and so it would be really cool to see it at least one human species in this show, and if I were to pick one, I would pick this one, as it is so unique and very interesting to learn about. And they were about the size of hobbits in the Tolkien novels and the Lord of the Rings films. So yeah, they weren't the largest human species, and so it'd be really interesting to put them alongside just these giants of animals like the Leptoptilus, as well as the Komodo dragon, as Flores was and still is partially inhabited by the world's largest lizard alive today, the Komodo dragon, and it would be great to see this apex predator coexisting with its extinct neighbours. The Toxodon was a large species of nodoungulate from South America that lived from the Pliocene to the end of the Pleistocene, and given that we are visiting South America for what looks like a prominent section of this episode, it would be fantastic to see this species, which was originally described by the famous naturalist Charles Darwin back when he visited South America in the 1830s, and I think he found a skull or something like that and was able to identify it as a completely new animal. So yeah, it'd be really cool to see this animal in South America in this series. Episode 3, titled Desert Lands, will cover what you might expect from the title, the drier areas of the planet during the late Pleistocene, such as the southwestern United States, as we can see with the presence of Nothrotheriops, aka the Shasta ground sloth, climbing the walls of an ancient canyon, and you can see the inspirations from modern anteaters and sloths, with the baby clinging to the mother's back and trying to blend in with her coloration. We also see the Teratornis, or simply Teratorn, which was a large vulture-like bird of prey that would have soared the skies of the southwestern US as well, as we see it here tormenting the Nothrotheriops as they're scaling the cliff. We are also visiting Pleistocene Australia, as we can see with these Thylacoleo or marsupial lions. Now, we have found multiple skeletons of Thylacoleo together, which may depict a possibly social lifestyle, with multiple animals sharing a den. Whether they would demonstrate cooperative hunting like this isn't fully known, as it is mostly agreed upon as it being an ambush predator that would leap down from the trees onto prey. But if a chase ensued, then it may be possible to suggest multiple animals would be needed to potentially bring down animals as large as the Protodon. But yeah, we'll need to see the context of this scene in a bit more detail when the series comes out, just to know exactly what's going on here. Varanus priscus, commonly known as Megalania, also appears in this series, as it was a large monitor lizard, a bit bigger than the Komodo dragon, at an estimated 5 meters long, with some estimates going as far as 7 meters, which would have been truly colossal for a lizard. The overall build of the animal in the show is pretty accurate to how monitor lizards look, except for one feature, and that being the slit pupil in the eye. All modern monitor lizards have round pupils, as like this Komodo dragon, as they are much of the time diurnal hunters, using their vision to see prey during the day. Any squamates that are nocturnal, like geckos and cat snakes, have slit pupils that help to focus light and increase depth perception. Megalania is largely believed to have been a diurnal predator, and it is also being depicted in this series as a diurnal predator, and so if it isn't nocturnal, then it shouldn't have these slit pupils, but I'm hoping that the show gives a reason for this choice. Procoptodon was a large Thanurine macropod, which is a group well known for their short faces, in comparison to modern kangaroos that have long muzzles. In this series we see them not hopping but striding, and that's because recent studies found that Procoptodon and other species of short-faced kangaroo were too heavy to hop and would break tendons if they tried to hop in the same manner as modern kangaroos do, and so it's more likely that they would have stridden with one foot ahead of the other, much like how theropod dinosaurs and we humans move. And it's certainly bizarre looking at a kangaroo and seeing it move in this way, but yeah, it would be really cool to see this scene in full, just to see these animals as they would have moved. So yeah, it's a very cool animal to see in this series. Diprotodon is the largest known marsupial and the largest herbivore in Pleistocene Australia. Its huge size made it a formidable prey for many animals that tried to dare tackle them, like the Thylacoleo and Megalania. But these animals would have roamed in potentially groups, but they could have also been loners. And many people call this a giant wombat, but they aren't quite a wombat. So they are related, like they're in the same general clade, the Diprotodontids, but they are a separate group of animals. But of which there were many different kinds of Diprotodonts living in Australia at the time. And so yeah, it'd be very interesting to see if we saw any more of them. But Diprotodon itself is probably Australia's most famous prehistoric mammal, other than an animal that we'll see later, as it is one that we know quite a lot about. Propleopus is what many are assuming this young animal is, as it appears to be a joey and would grow into an animal that's about the same size as a modern wallaby. Now, not as much is known about this species as others, but yeah, it's a really interesting and diverse choice, and yeah, we'll see if it is indeed Propleopus when the series comes out. The thorny devil also appears here, as it was around during the Pleistocene and would have evolved in Australia's drying conditions. Dinornis, or the giant moa, now the episode is called Desert Lands, but it seems we are going to the forested islands of New Zealand as well. So I've gone for the North Island giant moa as my assumption here, as it is considered the largest of the two, the other being the South Island giant moa, and that it is considered the tallest bird ever to have existed, with the female on the right reaching about 12 feet tall. The much smaller male on the left is much brighter in colour, and moas have been well known in recent years for sporting some of the most dramatic sexual dimorphism of any bird known. As we are visiting New Zealand, it would be fantastic to see the Haas eagle appear, as it was the natural predator of the moa and was heavily dependent on them, with moas being the largest and most viable prey items on the islands. And it is thought that when the Maori arrived on New Zealand, they hunted the moas as food because, well, they were available. But the disappearance of the moas led to the disappearance of the Haas eagle, as it was the moa was a keystone species, and so it was heavily relied upon by an eagle of this size, and so yeah, it had a domino effect basically. But yeah, it would be really fantastic to see this animal. Genyornis, or the thunderbird, is a large bird that roamed Australia during the Pleistocene, and there were various types of giant flightless birds roaming Australia at this time, including the modern emu and cassowary, so it would be great to see at least one of the extinct birds during Australia, like during the Australia sequences. However, one animal that I definitely want to see in at least one of the Australian sequences is of course the thylacine or Tasmanian tiger, one of the most famous extinct animals of all, and was found across Australia during this time, and so fingers crossed it does appear in this series, as it would be amazing to see this animal at least appear briefly. We move now on to episode 4, Grasslands, and we start with the Elasmotherium, a large rhinoceros that inhabited Siberia during the Pleistocene. It has often been depicted with long prominent horns, well, a single long prominent horn on its head, but this hypothesis has been reduced to more of a boss-like structure on its head, which would have still been an effective defensive weapon, just not as fantastical as previous depictions. Didicurus also appears in this series, sporting both the Glyptodon's prominent shell, but also its mighty tail club that is believed to have wielded large spikes, but could have just as easily have been rounded blocks similar to the clubs in animals like ankylosaurs. But this species is a real throwback to Walking with Dinosaurs, and I'm really happy to see it here. It also displays this similar behaviour to modern armadillos, where they'll go onto their hind legs to get a better look around. We also venture to Africa in this episode with the large terrestrial otter Enhydriodon, which would have roamed around countries like Ethiopia where there were Great Plains, but also other formidable predators, such as what could potentially be Meganterion, which was a saber-toothed cat from the same time and same area, and was a great predator. It is also well known for feeding on early humans like Homo erectus and habilis. But it could also be Homotherium, as Homotherium is thought to have also lived in Africa at this time, with the general patterning of proportions resembling the Homotheriums we see hunting the Coelodonta. But let me know what you think. But yeah, we're going to see both the Enhydriodon and saber-toothed cat clash in this episode, so could be a pretty interesting fight. Despite the episode being titled Grasslands, we will also be visiting some forests, as this is where we'd find Gigantopithecus, the largest ape ever known to have lived. It lived in South and Eastern Asia during the Pleistocene and would have been largely quadrupedal, much like modern gorillas and chimpanzees, though it may have had a lifestyle similar to the orangutan, which it would have been living on the mainland of Asia at this time. But this is a really unique and exciting species to see included in this series, and I know a lot of people were really hoping for it to appear. Some other species that would be great to see would be one of the largest land mammals ever known, the Paleoloxodon, which would have lived in Africa around the same time as the Enhydriodon, and so would be lovely to see roaming the savannah in the background. Or perhaps a familiar neighbouring species in Dinotherium, a very unique elephant known for its downward pointing tusks which sprouted from the lower jaw. Civatherium also lived on the savannas at this time and was a large relative of modern giraffes and okapi, and would have been quite the sight to see with its very distinct horns that sprouted out from its skull. Dinopithecus as well lived at this time, a large relative to modern baboons, which would have potentially been more carnivorous in many depictions than modern baboons are, so it would be very interesting to see them potentially steal a kill from one of the African predators. Now on to the final episode, The Great Melt, focusing on areas affected by the end of the Ice Age, with both the die-off and emergence of many species in light of the changing climate, such as the Aepyornis of Madagascar, also known as the elephant bird, which would have laid some of the largest eggs of any animal. The giant fossa is also featured here, a prominent predator at this time in Madagascar, and that dark coloration is no accident, as in Malagasy mythology it was spoken of that a giant black fossa once roamed, and could have very likely have been the now extinct giant fossa. And so yeah, it's really cool to see it here, and to know that it potentially could have lived very recently is very exciting indeed. Homotherium is very prominently featured in this series, being found in many parts of Eurasia and even North America during the Ice Age. And so we get a few different depictions of it, with the first in the forest sporting some very snow leopard-like colours, and then on the open tundra is a much paler white variation. Now, something I'd like to point out here is the show is taking this opportunity to depict a recent hypothesis that some of the saber-toothed cats would have concealed their sabers behind lips, as the sabers aren't the most durable weapons, like they are very specialized, and so having them exposed isn't necessarily likely, because These sabers wouldn't have grown continuously throughout their lives like other predators like Tasmanian devils do, where their teeth are sprouting from the mouth. Instead, growing to a fixed size and then staying there for the rest of their lives. And so having them concealed by lips is fairly likely, as there are many predators today that have these large canine teeth that are concealed by lips. And these are also not tusks, so they aren't in the same league as animals like musk deer, elephants, walruses, or narwhals, where their large canine teeth are exposed. So yeah, it would be really interesting to see this in action. The La Brea tar pits are also appearing in this series, seen here trapping a Columbian mammoth, the second largest mammal to roam North America during the Pleistocene. But it isn't the only famous species of La Brea being featured in the series, and also a species that has created some recent controversies. That being the Anasion or the direwolf. So it is also appearing in this series, sporting a much more realistic coloration of the direwolf than the modified white-grey wolves that have been engineered by Colossal Biosciences, with a browner coat to better blend with its surroundings. So this animal actually has probably one of the largest fossil collections out of all the animals found at La Brea, with thousands of skulls having been found. So it was certainly a very common animal at the time, and this could potentially be the same scene where that Columbian mammoth is getting trapped and these dire wolves are waiting for it to die, but of course they would get trapped in the tar themselves. The Stelis sea cow was the largest Sirenian, and I feel it is being featured in this episode as it lived in the North Pacific, which would have been covered in ice during the peak of the Ice Age. And so once the ice began to melt, more ocean opened up for animals like the Stelis sea cow to come in and feed on kelp. This species is, however, unfortunately an animal that was hunted to extinction by humans in relatively recent times, with the last confirmed animal being killed off Bering Island in the 1760s. As we do see some species that did survive into the modern day, I feel like seeing the dodo at least once would be really cool, as this animal is, yeah, it's very iconic to say the least. Like, it is a very well-known animal to many, and so I feel like this episode being at the end of the Ice Age, it would be the perfect opportunity to include it. As we do also go to Madagascar with the Aepyornis and giant fossa, seeing at least one of the extinct lemurs found on the island at the time, such as the Megaladapus, would be really cool as well. Even a large terrestrial species like Archaeoindris would be a very interesting species to see showcased in the Madagascar sequences. But that is all for this video. Those are all the species that have been confirmed, but also a few other species that are sort of wish list animals that I really do hope we see in the series, as they would really increase the biodiversity, but also just include a lot of interesting animals that haven't been depicted in a documentary before, or animals that are just so iconic to this period in Earth's history that it makes sense to include them. And yeah, I'm really hoping that we do see animals like the dodo and the thylacine to be able to celebrate them in a quality show like this that has such incredible CGI. These animals could be brought to life in the most accurate forms that we've ever seen, and so like it would almost be surreal to see that like last footage of the thylacine be brought into a series with an accurate model, and just see it living as an animal. And yeah, I think that would just be really incredible. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on the species that are included in Prehistoric Planet Ice Age. Any other species that you think I missed that you would like to see in the show, please let me know down in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.